Okay, we are back on another edition of the Edlow podcast. Hit subscribe if you haven't yet. I have Paige Cleek. Hello, Paige. How are you?
Hello, I'm great. How are you doing?
Great. I'm glad that you accepted the invitation to come on. You were highly recommended by your state president to come on and talk about various subjects. So I'm excited. And also, you have a connection to a couple of former guests, Kevin and Debbie Evers.
Yep.
So that's fun. Now you're Debbie's niece?
Yes.
Okay.
So
And so you have some
Deb,
set line in you.
yeah. So Debbie is my mom's youngest sister.
Okay. All right. And then your parents, where do they live?
My mom is in Citrus Heights, so she is still right around the corner from my grandparents' same house where Debbie grew up.
Oh wow. Oh, so Stan and he still lives there. Same house?
Yep. Yep. Same house.
Man, they Stan Sedgwick is so impressive to me because I did you know the Summer Hazes as well? Do you know any of them?
I know of them. I don't know them very well.
Okay. So the Summer Hazes are another one because they're they had a gaggle of kids on a teacher's budget. And it's impressive that they were able to do that. So
Yes. Yeah. My grandpa's the best. My grandparents are both the best. They basically raised my brothers and I, but they're awesome. Like nobody is a harder worker than my grandpa.
yeah. So now grandparents, do you pets or do you just kind of stay close to one?
Sorry, you cut out for a second. What was the question?
Do your grandparents, do you know both sets pretty well or is it just the one?
So I grew up with kind of both sets, like mom's side and dad's side. My grandparents on my dad's side have passed away, and I'm not really in contact with anybody from that side of the family. So usually when I talk about my family, my grandparents, that's all my mom's side.
Yeah. It's interesting because that's the way I grew up too. My grandparents on my mother's side were incredibly involved, like really involved. And then my dad's I met my dad's dad once. So so yeah, so grandparents hold a special place in my heart because of the ones that were so heavily involved.
Totally. Yeah.
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 So now you grew up then in Citrus Heights?
Yes. So I grew up, we actually lived at my grandparents' house for a few years when I was younger, my mom and my brothers and I. And then after that, we moved just right around the corner from them. So, same house my mom still lives in is right around the corner from where my grandparents have lived for, I don't know, probably 40 years, over 40 years.
Yeah. So you are in your home stake still.
Yes, and that is not something that I thought would happen. I was like, I am not gonna live here. I am out of this place as soon as possible. There's no way I'm coming back here. So it's really, really interesting because in our ward and in our stake, there's all these people who I grew up with their kids. I went to high school with their kids, or like they were my youth leaders in girls' camp and stake activities and things like that. So it's kind of weird. But I think I've adjusted to it and gotten used to that by now.
Yeah, I did the same thing. I bounced in and out of I was from the Carmichael stake and I bounced in and out my home ward the whole time. And it's just so weird when you're there and they knew you as a kid and they know all the things you did that you messed up when you were a teenager and they bring it up in front of your kids and you're like, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I literally had someone get up. So I had a little stint where I was a little bit of a rabble rouser and I ended up invading girls camp with a few of my friends and
Mm.
we got caught, we got in trouble, all that stuff. And then I think I was probably 30 years old sitting in a pew when someone got up and bore their testimony and talked about me going to girls camp. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me, I'm never gonna let it's down. So yeah, that's interesting. So did you now you grew up so close to your grandparents. When you moved in, were there still kids at home or were they that was a
Yeah,
busy house, huh?
I don't remember super well because I was little. I was probably 5 to 7, I would say, about that. I know there were at least a couple of them, and Debbie and I were actually roommates. Debbie and I shared a room when I was little, so we have an extra special bond.
Oh, nice, nice. How now? So you shared a room. How long did you share a room for?
Honestly, I don't remember.
Oh,
Debbie could answer that question. I was little, so
okay.
my whole like memory's a little off.
I see. Okay. And then you moved down the street and
Mhm.
tell me what it was like. I mean, as a teenager, give me a sense of what it was like growing up as a member of the church.
Oh, yeah, that's an interesting question because that's going to be different for everybody depending on where you live, what your situation is. But um, I don't know. That's like all I knew. So I didn't really know like what else to compare it to. I was never really like the rebellious kid or like getting into trouble or anything like that.
Mhm.
I was a pretty good rule follower for the most part. Definitely had a little attitude and definitely like to push back at times. Um, but overall, I was really shy as a kid. So growing up, like painfully shy, painfully quiet, like could not talk to anybody. I actually had selective mutism when I was in about kindergarten, probably. Um, and so basically, what that is, I see you're looking
Yeah,
a
I'm like,
little
well, I'm like selective mutism. What is that?
yes.
Never heard that.
So I was fully able to have a conversation with somebody if I wanted to, but I just didn't. So there's probably just a handful of people I would talk to. I would talk to my parents, I would talk to my brothers, I would talk to my grandpa, not my grandma, not the one who picked us up from school and took care of us after school, not her.
Hmm.
And I had maybe like two friends that I would talk to, but I didn't talk to anybody else. And so that was really interesting.
So,
Um,
so how, wait, real quick. So how does that develop and how do you get over that? Does it just get over it naturally or?
I would say in terms of how it developed, probably stems from like trauma,
Hmm.
some like unresolved trauma, and that's like a kid's way of processing it, or probably was my way of asserting some control when I didn't have any control, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense.
Um, Go ahead.
No, no, that makes sense, and this is something I've never heard before. I've had a bunch of mental health people on, and that's something that I've never come across. So, does that something that a lot of these things that happen, even some stuff that happens in speech therapy, like lisps and things like that, sometimes can just kind of you overcome it naturally. Did you just naturally overcome it, or did you have to go through stuff to get through it?
Kind of a combination. So it wasn't like a speech delay. I could
Mhm.
fully like speak perfectly fine. It wasn't like an intellectual or like learning disability or anything like that. Um, it would I think it was more so just like me trying to have control a little bit. Um, I remember in elementary school I went to play therapy and I think my older brother did as well. So we had this lady, we would go and play, and she would try to get us to talk to her, and we wouldn't. And also very stubborn, so that didn't help. But eventually, I just was like, kind of tired of this, like tired of being this weird kid who doesn't talk to anybody.
Right.
So I would say probably in about third grade, I started like talking to my teachers at school, like a normal level of weird shy kid. Um, yeah, but I was still very shy. Very, very shy all the way up until probably high school.
Hmm. Wow. So, when just if you can remember when you're going through that, let's say someone comes up to you and approaches you when you have selective mutism, is it a conscious choice to not talk to them, or is there some anxiety involved, or can you remember?
I don't quite remember. What I do remember is like I would answer them in my head, and I'm like, why don't you know what the answer is? Like I'm answering you in my head.
Uh-huh.
Um, I think there was some of it where I felt like I physically couldn't do it, and I
Hmm,
felt like I actually couldn't.
hmm.
Um, and I don't know. That's something that I probably need to process a little bit more in therapy, I would say.
Yeah. Well, and that's interesting, the more I talk to people about this, it's so the way trauma, the way it manifests is so individual and so fascinating for so many
Mhm.
different people, and this is just another one that I've never heard of before, so I just am really interested, by it. Now, do you feel like, so it sounds like you've done different forms of therapy over your life to deal with some unresolved trauma. Is that fair?
Not a whole lot of like actual official like organized therapy.
Mm,
Definitely need to. Definitely should. I think everybody should. I think
we all
everybody.
do, yeah.
Um, but I think I've done a lot of personal work, especially given my training in grad school, which we can get into that a little bit later, but I've kind
Yeah.
of been able to like recognize some things in myself and like process that. Um, yeah, I think I'm pretty self-aware. So
That's
that helps.
I got to tell you though, the thing that I found so fascinating in talking to so many different people, both here and then just unofficially, just randomly talking to people, is how far ahead you can be if you are self-aware.
Mhm.
A lot of people have a really, really hard time seeing their part, and not only seeing their part in things, but also like just, they can point out things that other people are doing, but don't see it in themselves. Do you see what I'm saying? So
Absolutely.
I think that you're way ahead of the game if you're self-aware. you
Oh
know
yeah, I have plenty of room to improve, and my husband will tell you the same thing. But
No,
in
he
some
shouldn't
ways,
tell you.
I'm very
He shouldn't tell
self-aware.
you. He shouldn't tell you. But he maybe he will. No, so okay, so growing up, in high school, you're painfully shy, and one thing
Mhm.
I found interesting about you is that you were pretty heavily involved in the pageantry circuit.
Yep.
Now, how does somebody who's painfully shy, afraid to talk to people,
Yep.
end up on doing pageants?
Yeah. So that is really what was transformative in my life and in bringing me out of that.
Hmm.
Um, so I was 15 when I started competing in pageants. I was a sophomore in high school, and I honestly don't even remember like how I got this idea or where this came from. But I think I was really searching for like my place or like my thing. Like all of my friends had their thing. So there's the soccer player, there's the cheerleader, there's the kid who plays all these instruments, whatever. Everyone kind of has their thing. I'm like, I don't really have a thing. Like I'm good at school and being quiet, and that's about it. And so I was looking for something I think to do, if that makes sense. I think in high school and like as teenagers, are really wanting like a sense of like belonging and purpose and community, I guess, if you will. And so I was kind of just looking for something to do. And I had joined tennis earlier that year. I was awful at it, absolutely terrible. I'm not athletic. I'm not good at that kind of stuff. I will say my second year of tennis, I did get most improved player. So,
Oh, there you go.
but
It's
when you're starting all the way down here,
yeah,
there's
yeah,
room for
most improved player means you're not quite as bad as you were.
yes, slightly less bad. So I honestly don't know how it even came up, but there was this pageant. It's called Miss Teenage California. And I don't think it's even around anymore, but it used to be this huge thing. And it was a scholarship pageant. So if you win, you get $10,000. Even if you're in like top 5, top 10, you still get however much money for scholarships. And so I was like, I kind of want to try this. I don't know. And I convinced my mom that it was a good idea. She didn't really think it was a good idea at first. She was like, "What are you talking about? Why do you want to do this? This is weird." At least that's my memory of how that went. Maybe her side of the story is a little bit different.
Well, let me ask you real quick while we're on this topic. First, I got to imagine, considering you as shy as you were, that this came as a real big shock to people when you're wanting to do it. Is that fair?
Probably.
Yeah, and then also, what was it specifically, if you can remember, about pageants that drew you to it?
I'm honestly not sure. I've always been very girly and like to dress up and that kind of stuff. So maybe it was that.
Mm.
Um, I used to watch Toddlers and Tiaras on TLC. I will say, disclaimer, it's not that. That's not what I did. That's
Okay.
not reality. This is not the same
I was,
thing.
I was gonna ask. I was like, was your mom one of those like pageant moms who were like
No.
forced you into it? Okay.
No,
All right.
no, no. She
Yeah.
actually tried to talk me out of it. At least my memory is that she tried to talk me out of it, and she didn't really want me to do this.
Mhm.
And it's very expensive too.
Mm.
And so it was a big, big commitment, not just a time commitment, but financial commitment. So somehow got her on board. I ended up competing. So first time when I was 15, and I was competing at this state pageant down in LA. There were over 130 contestants, and my goal was to make the top 30. And I ended up making the top 10.
Oh, nice. First
And
shot.
not, didn't have a clue what I was doing. So out of my element. Not a clue. Like, I went in blind. People have coaches. People prepare for years for these kind of things. And I was like, well, let's just give it a shot and see.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, right? Like this, it sounds to me, because I don't know anything about pageants, right? But I played basketball, and like there was nothing more frustrating than someone who could just pick up a ball and naturally be talented at it. So were some of the other girls who, when they heard that, were they like a little like ticked off? They're like, "What do you mean that you're just like coming in here without any, coming in hot, just like, like just coming in with no training and just getting to the top 10?" Was that?
I mean, I don't think so. I think pageants get a lot of hate and have kind of bad rap, and people think that pageant girls are mean and catty, and you're like out to get each other, and you're like trying to sabotage each other. It's very much not the case. Like, everyone, at least the vast majority, you're gonna get bad people here and there. There's gonna be mean girls mixed in anywhere, but the vast majority of probably thousands of people that I've competed with or come across in pageants are so nice, so friendly, so supportive, like genuinely helping each other. So yeah, not really a whole lot of that I experienced.
Interesting.
But I was like,
that's really interesting, just because, I mean, like, so I worked in a hair salon for a while, and in fact, Debbie was one of the ones who got me the job. And so I'm working in a hair salon with all of these girls who, I got to imagine those are, I don't know if they're the type, I don't know what the pageant girl type is, but I got to imagine they're not too dissimilar. And the drama, though, that went along with like all of those hairdressers was really surprising. Was there any drama going on in the background ever, or?
I mean, there's definitely drama like in the pageant world, but not as much as you would think. At least not as much that I really was like directly in contact with. It's more like hearing about stories, and it's really not so much the girls themselves. It's usually like the crazy family members. So
that's the way it is in most sports.
Exactly.
It's like the mom from the bleachers screaming at the refs. Yeah,
exactly. That's exactly.
Wow. So you get through this one, and you go your top 10. Probably surprised, right? That you made it.
Shocked.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So what's the next step then?
So after that, I was hooked. I was like, wait, that was so fun. Like, that was the most fun I've ever had. That was great. And if I can do that well on my first try, not knowing what I'm doing, like maybe if I actually tried and prepared, then maybe I could be really good at this. So I competed again. I competed in that pageant 3 years. And then I moved to college, and it was just a bunch of other stuff after that. More pageants, more fun.
Now, when you're in a pageant, though, what are you competing for? I know the one you were doing, you were competing for scholarships, but in other pageants, is there like are you just trying to win trophies? Is there sponsorships? Like, how do people engage in a pageant life?
Yeah, so it really depends. There's a lot of different pageants, and they're all different. They all have different areas of competition, so different things that you're doing. And they all have different prize packages or things like that. So some of them are scholarship pageants where you're winning money for school. Some of them are preliminary pageants that will lead you to like the next level. So there's local pageants where if you win that, then you have all these sponsorships and prize packages to prepare for the state level. Or if you win the state pageant, then you go to the national pageant, and then they include your entry fee, usually some coaching, a gown, or money towards your competition wardrobe. And there's honestly a lot of random stuff. There was one pageant I won when I was in college where I won a rock climbing gym membership, which is super random. So it really just depends. They're all different. There's different sponsors and things like that that contribute to the prize packages.
Interesting. So when you're so like what was your when going through the pageants, what was your goal? Did you, after the first time, you're like, okay, was there a goal that you were hoping to reach?
I mean, you always want to win, of course,
Mhm.
but I think speaking generally, and I think most people who compete in pageants will agree with this, that just winning the crown, winning the title is not like the only thing that's important. It's really like a personal development program, I would say. It's really about like bettering yourself, whether that is your public speaking skills, your interview skills, your resume building skills, getting more involved in the community. For a lot of these pageants, community service is a huge thing that is not only important for the contestants, like as you're competing, you need to have so many hours of community service, but if you win the title, that's a huge part of that. That's kind of like the point, is to get out in the community. You're representing different programs. They call it a platform. That's kind of like your cause or your mission for your year that you are holding whatever title. So for one of the pageants, their platform is this anti-bullying campaign. It's called BRAVE. It stands for Building Respect and Values for Everyone. And so you can, for certain pageants, you can also choose your own platform, whether that's blood cancer awareness or Back the Blue, supporting law enforcement, or any cause or thing that's like near and dear to your heart. A lot of charity work, volunteer events, reading to kids in schools, speaking in elementary school assemblies, presentations, and things like that.
Wow. So you mentioned the levels. What level did you get to?
I competed at one national pageant. So most of the time I competed at state pageants in California and in Hawaii, where I went to college. And I had won a state pageant in Hawaii that then took me to a national pageant.
Oh,
And
wow.
competed at nationals once. I also competed in some other smaller local pageants that then send you to the state level. But there's a lot of different pageant systems as well, so they all work a little bit differently.
So this sounds like a lot. It sounds like a lot of stuff. Like my sisters were dancers,
Okay.
so and I just remember how much of a commitment. That was like they were just, my parents were dance parents. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? And then when it came to my kids, I was like, I'm not gonna do that. That's too much. And so were you pretty much for a few years, were you just like that was what you, that you found your community, like that was it?
Yeah, that's what I did. Really through like my last 3 years of high school, that's what I did. And when I was in high school, I only competed like once or twice a year.
Mhm.
So, and I didn't really win. After I graduated high school, I won a local pageant that
Mhm.
was Miss West Coast Teen USA. That was my first pageant I finally won. And then that was a preliminary to Miss California Teen USA. But it was right before I was moving to college in Hawaii. So
Mhm.
that was a little complicated. But then when I was in college, that's when I won Miss Hawaii Collegiate America. And that was very time consuming. That ate up so much of my time. I honestly don't know how I did it looking back,
Mhm.
because we were required to make 4 appearances or do 4 community service things a month. And I was doing more than that. I was doing at least 2 a week.
Wow. So that sounds, I mean, Miss Collegiate Hawaii, what was it called? Miss Collegiate what?
Miss Hawaii Collegiate America.
That sounds like, I mean, pretty prestigious. I mean, was that a pretty prestigious one to win?
Yeah, that's a big one now. The national one is Miss Collegiate America. They have Miss High School America, Miss Junior High School America. That's a really big one. That was so fun. That national pageant is so fun.
Nice, man. So now, tell me what. So, like preparing for a pageant,
Mhm.
what do you do to prepare?
Oh, so much, so much. So
Well,
people,
let me start with this. What, like, how much time? So, like, I'm thinking in the course of like MMA fighter or a boxer goes in and they have like a 6 week, like, okay, they're training all the time, but then they've got a 6 week they really hone in. Is that kind of what it's like?
It just depends because you can sign up for these kind of at any point. There's always deadlines that you have to be signed up by. But some people will plan and they'll be like, okay, in like 2 years, I'm going to compete for Miss California USA or whatever it is. And so I'm going to do all this stuff to prepare. So part of it is like active, healthy lifestyle. So not all pageants have a swimsuit competition, but some of them do. So you obviously want to be like healthy. It's not like necessarily being the strongest, most ripped person or whatever, but like you want to be healthy and be put together. So that's part of it. Practicing interviews and public speaking, things like that. We have onstage questions. So you pull a question out of a bowl, they ask it to you, and you have 30 seconds to come up with an answer that sounds intelligent and put together and don't end up on YouTube for saying something stupid.
Right. Yeah.
So a lot of that, a lot of mock interview practices, a lot of walking practice. So you have to walk on stage, usually an evening gown, either a swimsuit or like a fun fashion kind of competition. So practicing your walking. Yeah, and then all the things to build your resume. So all the volunteer work, all the service, and all of those different activities to go on your resume or your bio sheet. So the judges will ask you questions off of that when you're in your interview.
Wow. Okay. Now, when you're going through this, what do people around you think? I mean, not just family, but like friends, people at the church. What are people thinking of you?
Most people think it's stupid. Most
Oh,
people think
really?
it's really stupid and pointless.
Really? Wow. Why? And what was your response when someone would say something like that?
I just don't really care what anybody else thinks.
Hmm.
So I used to care, but
Okay.
I got
Okay.
to the point where I don't care. I think that comes from a lot of misconception, and people think that, oh, pageant girls are just self-centered and conceited, and they only care how they look, and they want to win a shiny crown, and they want people to think that they're the best and they're the greatest. But that's really just not true. And so that's why those people's opinions don't matter, because it's not correct.
Right. Let me ask you about that, because I'm kind of the same way in that I stopped caring a long time ago what people thought about. Like, I'm a big pro wrestling guy. I wrestle professionally. I've traveled and done that, and everybody thought that was the dumbest thing ever. You know what I mean? But I was like, I don't care. I like it. So you
Mm-hmm.
don't have to like it. That's fine.
Yep.
But you said something interesting. I can't remember really it was after 7th grade ever really caring what anyone thought about what I did. But you mentioned you you used to care and now you don't. What was it that made the change?
I think it was actually developing self-confidence.
Hmm. And did that come through the pageantry?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So even the first couple years I was competing, I was still shy. I was still like, oh, I'm not doing this right, comparing myself to the other girls. Their dress is better, or they've been doing this longer, or they have money to pay for these coaches and that kind of stuff. But I don't think it was like one moment. I think it was more of a gradual process where I actually became like self-confident, and then it doesn't matter what people think. If you are confident about yourself and you like yourself, then who cares if somebody else likes you?
Yeah, that's a good point. And it's interesting because there are so many people out there who really do. Like they really care. And that's where you get a lot of people who kind of live one life a certain way, but then, they kind of they for the world, but then not the same at home.
Mm-hmm.
And that in my mind that just causes more problems. Now, circling back though, back to church stuff. I mean, one of the things that I think probably a misconception, like you mentioned, swimsuit competitions and evening gowns, right? And I'm sure, some people have a misconception that you're just being completely immodest and like doing all of
Mm-hmm.
these things. Did that ever carry through, especially when you were in high school? Did you notice a lot of that?
I definitely had comments from people at church. I think for the most part, people kept their mouth shut, but there were people that made comments like, oh, that's not modest, or blah, blah, blah. Like other girls at church or my young women's leaders, sometimes maybe a couple of them. I remember distinctly an uncle of mine made several comments about how I'm a horrible example to his children because I wore a strapless dress and I can't be around his kids, and he's not going to like my picture on Facebook. Okay, I don't care. Go like somebody else's picture on Facebook. I don't need your validation.
I don't know. I don't know if you guys, I don't know. I just don't think I'm like, if I had a niece that posted a picture of herself in a swimsuit, I don't think I'm liking that anyway.
Yeah,
You
right,
know?
right, right. It wasn't even a
So,
swimsuit. I didn't even compete in swimsuit until later, but it
uh-huh,
was a dress. Okay, my shoulders are out. We all have shoulders. All right.
right,
It's
right.
not that deep, guys.
Yeah. But I mean, so did that ever affect you in any way? I mean, or at this point were you like, I don't care?
Um, I don't really remember. I mean, maybe it like hurt my feelings in the moment, but
Didn't stop you.
yeah, like okay,
Uh-huh.
probably just like fueled the fire a little bit more. I'm kind of the person where if you're gonna tell me not to do something, I'm gonna do it. So
Yeah. Yeah. And that, yeah, you're speaking my language here. I'm the same type, that goes with that stubbornness, hard-headedness is if somebody tells you you can't do something, it just makes you want to do it more.
exactly.
You
Like,
you
okay,
do have
watch.
you do have a little bit of rebellion in you. So so now, well, then as a, you're a little bit older now, I was assuming you're not doing other pageants for your age group now?
There are like Mrs. pageants. I'm not doing that anymore. I competed in one tiny little local one in 2019, a year after I got married, um, just kind of for fun. And I was like 20 years younger than all of the other contestants in that division because everyone's married.
Right.
But I'm not competing anymore, no.
Okay. So I guess, as someone who now, you're a few years out from that and you lived that as a teenager, what would you say like I have two young girls who are 15 and almost 13, and I mess with them about modesty, but they're good kids, and they're you know they're very good kids. Uh
Mhm.
you know what is your view if you had a young woman come to you and say, "Hey, listen, what do you think about what I'm hearing at church and modesty and things of that nature?" Like what would be your advice?
I think your intention is what matters. Like if you're trying to wear something super showy so people are looking at you, or so the boy that you have a crush on notices you or something like that, and like you're doing it for whatever external validation and like people to notice you, like that's maybe a little sketchy. Like that's
Mhm,
maybe crossing the line from like the modesty aspect. But I think modesty is really, it really has more to do with like your intention and like where your heart's at versus like
mhm,
what you're literally wearing.
mhm,
Um, so I think that's a tricky situation because everybody's different and their experiences are different with what people have told them so far, or different family values are different. But I think just checking like what the intentions are, and I also think like from the adult standpoint, like other adults that are not your kids' parents should not be making comments about their body or what they're wearing. Like that's
mhm.
inappropriate.
Yeah. Yeah, I like what you said there, where you said it's not as much about what you're wearing as much as it is about kinda like how you're carrying yourself or your intention. 'Cause, like,
Mhm.
I mean, I see, women, you know, uh, all the time that are wearing various different things. I just went to a conference in San Francisco for attorneys, and the women there are wearing all sorts of different evening dresses and gowns and things at a dinner, and I think it's different when what you're leading with, if that makes sense,
Mhm.
as to whether that, I think that has more to do with modesty than anything. And so I think that's very interesting. Now, as a young woman, as you were coming up through church, I'm interested in your experience in dealing with the young women's program as you're going through this. And the reason I am is because I've spoken with a number of people who had very different experiences with the church. How did you feel in young women's as you're going through this? You're hearing these comments about, oh, I don't think that's modest, or things of that nature. What was your experience like during that time as going through the Young Women's Program?
It really wasn't that bad. Honestly, I think in Young Women's, it wasn't that bad. It was kind of like, okay, I'm just here. This is just what we do. We just come to church. We just kind of whatever. I think that kind of thing that you're talking about and alluding to is more of a problem when I was actually in college than when I was
Mm.
younger.
Oh, okay. Well, let's talk about that. What happened in college?
Yeah, so I went to BYU Hawaii. So
Uh-huh.
for people who are listening who don't know, that's a religious school, very strict rules and strict honor code and that kind of thing. And I was still competing in pageants at that point. I had competed at Miss Hawaii USA, very prestigious, very like well known in the pageant world. And there's certain things that you're required to wear when you compete. Sometimes if there are sponsored outfits, you have to wear them. And so in that pageant system, there is a swimsuit competition. And per my school's honor code, that was not within those rules or within what you're supposed to be wearing. And so I had all kinds of problems in college, primarily stemming from a set of roommates of mine who honestly don't really know where this even came from, but would just like report me to the honor code, tried to get me kicked out of school, tried to get me kicked out of our house that we lived in. Um, it was honestly really bad. It was really bad.
Wow. And this is all stemming from just something you wore at a pageant?
I mean, that was part of it. I think there was probably other stuff as well,
Hmm.
but that's definitely like some of the stuff that they used against me, where I'd get called into the honor code office and they're like, well, there's a picture of you on the internet wearing this bikini. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
sorry.
Wait. So I never went to a BYU school, but I've heard of the honor code. Is there a rule against bikinis in the honor code?
I think so,
Hmm.
probably.
Wow.
I don't remember the exact verbiage or how it's worded,
Even
but
if you're not on campus?
yeah, so the honor code technically still applies to you even if you're not on campus.
Wow.
So, I mean, technically, I was breaking the rules, and I can't deny that because that's a fact. But
But you're doing it as
come
part of
on,
yeah, you're doing this as part of this pageant circuit.
right? And everybody else at that school is wearing bikinis down on the beach just around the corner from the school, so I'm not doing anything different than anyone else.
Did you get the sense that these roommates probably had some other issue with you and was using this as a way to kind of get back at you, being a little
Def-
catty? Hmm.
Definitely, but I think that is taking it a little too far.
Yeah.
Like, if you have a problem with me, you can just tell me. You don't have to go and get me kicked out of school.
Hmm. Yeah. Wow. How many roommates did you have in this
Too many, too many.
Yeah.
So that house that I'm referring to, there were 10 of us,
Oh, man.
which
Yeah.
is that's not a good idea. Anyone who's listening, who's going to college, don't live with that many people. That's my
I can't
number one piece of advice.
I can't imagine living so I went on a mission and I lived in a foursome a couple of times, and, like, the even with 4, the amount of, like, drama that you would ensue living with that many people. 10 for sure.
Mhm.
Like, you're bound to have problems with 1 or 2 of them.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Especially if you're a little outspoken and have a little bit of attitude, like, that's not you're not gonna, you're not gonna make, friends with everybody, man. So, okay, so, uh, in the course of this, where, um let's talk a little bit about your testimony and, when it comes to this. Did that come along in high school, later, or did you always know?
Yeah, I think probably later, I would say. like growing up, I would mostly go to church with my grandparents. My mom's not the most timely person, so if we wanted to be on time, we, if we wanted to be on time, we'd go with my grandparents, and my grandma's pretty strict. She's very much a rule follower. She didn't like the swimsuits and the strapless dresses either, but she was very good. My grandparents were very good about encouraging us to go to church and taking us to our activities and things like that. And I was friends with the girls in my ward. And so I think at that age, that's kind of what you go for. Like when you're a teenager, you go because those are your friends, or you go because you're supposed to, or your family's telling you you're supposed to go. And then in college, of course, you're like free to make your own choices. You can do whatever you want. But I also kind of got to the point where I was like kind of forced to go after this whole fiasco of my roommates trying to get me kicked out of school. I had my ecclesiastical endorsement taken away. The bishop basically told me I was a horrible person and I was making really bad decisions, and that it was really bad. I was like, what is going on? This is crazy. He pulled my endorsement, which if you don't have your ecclesiastical endorsement, you're kicked out of the school. And it was a little bit different than how other people would like get kicked out of school. If the honor code tries to kick you out, the bishop can like keep you in. But if the bishop tries to kick you out, the honor code can't do anything about it. And I told the bishop that if he kicked me out of school, I wasn't stepping foot in a church building ever again.
Wow. So wait, okay. So just so I understand, because here's the thing, right? Like, and this is what I don't get about this stuff, is that like, if you can wear a bikini, take a picture, post it on Instagram, and still have a temple recommend. Like lots of people do it. You know what I mean? So what was the malfunction here? You know what I mean? Like what was what I don't understand what tell me what your view of this was, like what the issue was.
It was honestly a mess. So like that was part of it. There was also some other false accusations regarding this like boyfriend I had at the time, and these roommates were saying I was doing things that I wasn't doing. And so like that was part of it as well. So and then they just started adding to the story, of course, trying to
get you kicked out.
Like it's right, trying to build this case against me. Essentially, I'm like, yes, I wore a bikini, but like that's about all that's true of this story. Right. So yeah, that's a whole story. We could get into the weeds of that. But essentially the bishop was like, you're making bad decisions, you're a liar, you're doing horrible things, and you're taking up somebody else's spot at this school. And I was crushed. This was I only had, I think, 2 more semesters to go until I was graduating, maybe 3. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, you kick me out of school? Like, I have to be here. So it was this whole story. I ended up appealing it to the stake president. The stake president actually believed me that I wasn't doing all of these things that I was being accused of doing. And so I was able to stay, but I was on a tight leash after that, where I was required to be at church every single Sunday. If I was going to miss church for like a community service event that I had or something, I would have to tell the bishop in advance. I would have to make arrangements to go to a different ward at a different time, introduce myself to that bishop, say my bishop's going to be checking in with you to confirm that I was here. Yeah, I had a bunch of extra rules and stipulations on that, kind of like being on probation, essentially.
Wow, man.
Yeah. Like, yeah, I was a good kid. I was not the kid that's like into drugs and drinking and partying. And
well, you know what's funny about that? And this is just anecdotal, right? But it's like, it's so funny how that kind of works. My experience as a high school kid, I was pretty rambunctious. Like I was the one who was interrupting firesides and youth conferences. You know, I was goofing around. I'm sure Debbie's got stories. But like I was never doing anything, at least that they were aware of, that was that bad, right?
Mhm.
There were other kids who were doing way worse. You know what I mean? Who like
Mhm.
they had this view, it seemed like sometimes, and no, look, this is not bad, obviously not bashing the church. It's just people are imperfect, right? But like those people who were way off the rails, they were like, well, we're just grateful they're here, right? But then like
Mhm.
you're like the middle of the road, just kind of goofing around, doing things that maybe are a little controversial, and they're like, huh, you're just a bad influence, you know? And it's just like, wait a minute. I'm the one who's these people over here who are doing drugs and drinking and doing all these things. I'm the one telling them they need to come to church with me. Yet I'm the one that's the one that you might not want to have at a youth conference. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
but here's the other thing I find really interesting, and I know I got a few years on you. So of the group, we had a large group of like a seminary group, right? We had a large group. The funny thing that I find is that of the boys, at least, the ones who are a little rough around the edges and a little controversial, they're active. But the ones who were like way out there and way over here, most of them are not.
Mhm.
It's really interesting to see. Like, and I don't know if that's just a generational thing with my generation, particularly of kids who grew up in the 90s, but that's what I'm seeing. Your generation, are you seeing anything like that with friends? Are you aware? You kept up with them?
Yeah, I think that probably holds true also.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I think that I actually just had this conversation with a friend of mine just a couple days ago, about, just about our views of church and church policy, and then also kind of the way church history should be, presented, and I have a very much more, "Hey, we should present it all" view, whereas he's like, "Well, we should just keep the faithful stuff" view. He's very rigid, and it's interesting because I find the people who are so rigid like that, when something happens that doesn't fit in their box, they really struggle,
Mhm. Yep.
and so that's interesting. So, where you have this struggle in church or in college, and you actually say to your bishop, "If you kick me out, I'm never setting foot in a church again." What
Mhm.
kept you in?
Well, one, I was required to come to church, so they wouldn't
Force
kick me
is a good
out.
force is a good one, sure. But but
Yeah, so
but why are you still going with this experience?
honestly, I don't know. I don't really have an answer to that. I think after this whole experience, I was like, okay, if you're gonna be mad at me for something I didn't do, like maybe I'm gonna go make some more like kind of questionable decisions. Didn't do anything really bad, but I was like a little more on the edge
Uh-huh.
um, through the rest of college, probably I would say.
Mhm.
And then when I graduated college, so I graduated with my bachelor's degree when I was 20. I moved back home. It
Wait,
was
that's quick. What did you
two
do
and a
for
half years.
wow. So you
Mhm.
were just like you were just pounding the books.
Yeah, so my school, when I was there, they changed our academic calendar. So the first year I was there, it was normal, like fall and spring semesters with the summer term in the middle, kind of normal schedule. And then after that, they went to these trimesters or 3 full semesters
Oh,
where
yeah,
you
yeah,
can,
yeah.
kind of
Okay.
like BYU Idaho does, but instead of being assigned to go to two of them, you can go to all of them. And I had come in with some credits from AP classes in high school, and I really just buckled down and knocked it out. I was taking like 17 to 19 credits a semester while also working 3 jobs and doing pageants and making all these appearances. And it was honestly nuts.
Yeah.
But I graduated in 2.5 years with my bachelor's degree. So I was only 20.
Dang. That's man, that's nuts.
Hmm.
What was the drive like, what was the drive behind that? Why do so much? Is that just it's just that who you are, or is there was some
I
reason?
kind of, not really any rhyme or reason to that. I think part of it too was after I had that whole experience that we kind of just talked about. I was like, I just got to get out of here.
Hmm.
Like let's just knock this out. Also, the school I went to was so small. It was about the same size as my high school. There were less than 3,000 students when I was there. I think it's grown by now, but it was very, very small. And so any of your upper level classes for your major were only offered once a year. And so you had to get it then, or you had to wait a whole year to take it. So there were certain semesters where I was like, I have to take these 3 upper level science classes, very rigorous, very intense. And like now's my only chance unless I want to be here another year. So that was part of it as well, as I was kind of just forced into that to get my things required to graduate.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. My daughter has suggested that she she's considered BYU Hawaii. She's 15 and she's the palest kid you'll ever see. So lots of sunscreen if she's out there. What advice would you have for kids, given your experience, which it sounds like some good, some bad? What advice would you give to somebody who's interested in going to specifically BYU Hawaii?
Overall, I will say I had a really positive experience aside from kind of this one bump in the road. Overall, absolutely loved it. Loved my time there. The piece of advice I would say is you really have to develop self-control, motivation, and time management skills because there's so much fun stuff to do. You're going to be out at the beach, surfing, hiking, adventuring all day long, and you're going to fail your classes if you don't develop that self-discipline and motivation.
Yeah. Curious, where did you work? Because everywhere I went, it seemed everywhere I went when I visited, there were BYU Hawaii kids working. Like they're at the Polynesian Cultural Center up at Kaloa Ranch. There were a bunch of people who went to BYU. And so where did you work?
My primary job that I worked the whole time that I was in school was in the athletics department, and it was so fun. I had the best job ever. I was a sports information assistant. And so I went to all of the sports games, which now they've gotten rid of their athletics department, which is honestly a tragedy. And I would write articles and recaps of all the games. So we go to the basketball games, softball, tennis, whatever, all the different things. And I would just write recap articles of the games. It was so fun. And I loved it.
You were a sports writer then.
Yes.
Awesome. Wow.
So that was super.
So now you graduate. What's your bachelor's in?
Biology with an emphasis in biomedical sciences and a minor in biochemistry.
Did you have something specific you wanted to do with that?
So I actually went to BYU Hawaii because I am obsessed with sharks. You don't hear this very often, but I wanted to be a marine biologist and work in shark conservation. So that's the reason that I went there initially. And then in my second semester, in my marine vertebrates class, I was like, I don't care about the rest of this stuff. This is all super boring. I don't care about narwhals. My daughter loves narwhals, my 3-year-old, but I don't care about all this other stuff. This is super boring. And I learned that I get very, very seasick. And so that would be a miserable job. I couldn't do that.
Sure. Man. Okay. And so, but you carry on with biology as you're getting out of it. Did you have plans to, because we're going to talk about grad school. Did you have an idea of what you wanted to do, or were you still considering?
Yes, I switched from marine biology to biomedical sciences because I decided that I wanted to go to med school and be a clinical geneticist. Which that didn't end up happening, but we can get to that.
Yeah. So you get done at 20. Do you come back to Citrus Heights? Is that okay?
Yes. So
go ahead.
My plan was to just be here for a couple of months. I was going to take the MCAT and start applying to medical schools. You have to apply a year in advance. And then I was going to move to Texas because the medical school that I wanted to go to was in Texas, and I wanted to establish in-state residency to be able to pay the in-state tuition.
And then that didn't happen.
Then I met my husband.
That changes everything.
Yes.
Guy messes up all the plans. So
no, it's better. It worked out better.
So you meet him. Where'd you meet him? YSA?
Yes, unfortunately.
Young single adults gets you every time.
Yes, it was so bad. There were like 10 people in that ward on a good day. It was a mess. It's like the the creepy people pushing 30 who still live in their mom's house that you like, please don't come anywhere near me. And then one day this new guy walks in. I'm like, where'd you come from? And here we are.
Was he did he grow up here, or was he like one of those bug boys that came in?
Neither. He grew up in the Central Valley in Tulare, Visalia area, about 3 hours away.
Yeah.
And then he had lived in Utah for about 10 years, and then he moved here for work, which you'll have that whole conversation with him.
Yeah, I will. We'll have him on eventually to talk about that. So now at this point, now you're coming back here, you're going to young single adults, small ward. It's interesting, it's interesting what the church did with the YSA, because when I came back from my mission and I went into the YSA, it was there were only 2 wards in the whole area, so they were big. And then they decided, and I understand why they decided, that every stake should have their own young single adult, because there were so many young single adults that were less active. They thought they'd be able to better, but it resulted in a lot of really, really small wards for a while. I think they've kind of gotten away from that now. I think they've
combined them back together.
Yeah. So like there's one for every few stakes, which I think is a little bit better, but I know for a while it was real slim. And so you meet now in this time frame, though, again, like your testimony, how is it growing? Is this I've seen there's 2 types of people. There's the type of people who just kind of always believed and just can't remember a time when they didn't. And then there's some people where they've had, like, there was a moment or a few moments that really solidified their testimony. Which do you think that there's a camp you fall in?
More so the first one, I would say. Even though I had that period in college where I was like, screw you, you guys tried to ruin my life. I hate everybody. I'm only here because I'm forced to. I think eventually that was good for me. I think I started to have some positive experiences at church through the rest of my time in college once I stopped being a brat about it. And then once I came back here, I was kind of like, this is what I need to do. Like, I think I just need to, like, I think I just didn't know what else to do. And that was just like, I knew that I should do that, I guess.
Well, so here's the reason why I bring this up and why I'm kind of hammering on this point, because I think this is really interesting. Because an experience like you had in college, at least from the people that I've talked to, like, I tend to be a little bit of a lightning rod for people who are going through, they call them faith journeys now. They used to call them faith crisis. And then also people who are just having general struggles in their lives or marriages or whatever. And one common theme that I see is that a bad experience with a bishop like you had could be a catalyst for starting people kind of down a path of leaving. Not saying that is the reason, not saying that that's the only reason, but if they maybe were struggling beforehand, something like that happens, it kind of pushes them further down, or it makes them start questioning.
Yep.
And so what is it about you that you think, or your experience, that made you not go that route, other than, of course, you were forced for a while? But I mean, like, I know some people who, with a hard head, stubborn type would, okay, I'm going to do this as long as I have to. And then as soon as I don't have to, I'm out. Like, why did you keep going, you think?
I really don't have an answer to that. Like, I wish I could pinpoint that a little bit better. I think I knew that it was true, and I knew that it was the right thing to do, and that like, there were enough, like, good experiences, and then I think I also had the ability to separate that one person who said those things to me from the actual gospel of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And
that's so important. Like,
right.
I can't emphasize enough when I talk to these people that have these issues, of why that is so important. Because if you only have to take a quick look through the Old Testament to realize that, like, people who are put in those positions are not perfect. Prophets, apostles, all the way down to your local bishop. And just because one person handles a situation poorly does not mean the whole gospel is untrue. And that's such an important point, to be able to differentiate that. You know,
Right. And
uh,
I think the stake president I had at that time was really helpful as well, in that he was much more supportive and much more reasonable, I thought. And so I think that was really helpful because I would have regular meetings with him as well. And so I think that was an important aspect of the whole journey and process as well.
mhm. Yeah, and I think also you mentioned the force part. I thought that's really interesting. In part of your story, you said, "Well, I was kind of forced to go, and I kind of was able to calm down a little bit, and start seeing these things." Because I remember I had an experience with the bishop where same thing, right? Like where it was like really not favorable. And I remember thinking to myself, I was like, I'm just going to do this as long as I have to do it, and then I'm gone, right? I'm going to do, and uh, I'm really glad that I did because over the course of time, as like I kept working with that bishop, I came to realize maybe I didn't agree with the decisions he made, but he was doing the things that he thought were important. And the increase of love I saw later,
Hmm.
if I would have just bounced when I got offended, I would
Hmm.
have missed all of that. The
Yep.
that bishop ended up becoming a huge blessing in my life, and I would have missed that. You know what I mean? If I would have just,
Hmm.
well, this is all ridiculous and I'm out of here, you know? So
Yeah.
so now you meet your husband. How long? I mean, are you the classic Mormon family? Are you like 3 months you're engaged, 6 months later you're married, you're pregnant a year later?
Pretty much, like, not too far off. And that was not my plan. So I
Mhm.
was very much like, nope, I'm going to be a doctor. I'm going to med school. I'm not getting married until I'm 35. And like everybody stay away from me. I was not looking for a husband. Like I know there's a lot of girls when they LDS girls when they're in college or when they finish college, they're like, okay, now I need to find a husband. Like let's do this thing. That was not me. I was not trying to do that, but
Mhm.
the Heavenly Father knew what I needed, I guess.
Yeah. Now tell me, what is it that, so let's talk about your husband a little bit. I know
Mhm.
him a little bit. So, at the time, he just recently wrapped up as a sheriff deputy. He After about 8 years, right?
Mhm.
So at the time, was he moved here for work to be a sheriff
Yeah.
deputy?
Yeah. So he was
Okay.
already doing that. He was already working for Placer County, and that was all I knew him as. I didn't know him before that.
Interesting. Okay. And so what was it about him that made you flip the script completely?
Oh man, I don't know. That's a hard question.
You're like, "I don't even know sometimes."
No, he's the best. He's great. Um he's very supportive. He tried to break up with me actually because he was like, I don't want to ruin your plans. I know you want to be this doctor and do all these things. He's like, I don't want to hold you back. Like I have to let you go and live your life. And I was like, no, I'm not going anywhere. You can't get rid of me that easy.
Oh, wow, man. So, so now you're married in the Sacramento Temple?
Yes.
Okay. And then, now so how long from meeting to marriage?
Um, a little over a year, but when we first met each other, we were both kind of in and out. I was still competing. I was competing in Miss California USA, so I was busy out of town kind of a lot, going to Southern California for things. And he was kind of working some Sundays or out of town with his family in the summer. So it was kind of on and off. We didn't see each other a whole lot at the beginning. From the time we started actually dating until we got married would have been probably like 9 months.
Yeah, that's typical. That's typical. Well, and the reason I bring that up is because that's really, I think that's important to the story because so you get married, obviously, you got married in the temple, so you didn't cohabitate beforehand.
Mm.
You're thrown in now, and you've known this guy for a year, really, really known him for 9 months, and then you're thrown into being a sheriff deputy's wife, right? So tell me, was that a bit of a culture shock for you?
Um, I just didn't know any different, I guess. Like I didn't know anything about law enforcement before. Um, So there's definitely some learning curve in terms of like, well, what's all this terminology or what are these things that you're doing and like that kind of stuff. But it just kind of was what it was. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. So as you start living together, was there a little bit of a adjustment? I mean, because you strike me as someone who, strong-willed, little independent, enjoys, probably, has a plan for herself, and then here now you've got to take into consideration somebody else, and then he is a sheriff's deputy, right? And I'm sure he probably has, you got to have a little bit of a bullhead to be able to do that. So, little bit of adjustment period, or
I
was it just like, you guys are great
I
right from
think
the
everybody has an adjustment period, no matter what your background is or what your career is. When you get married or you start living together with somebody, there's going to be an adjustment period, no matter what. I don't think there was anything like super abnormal.
Mhm.
The schedule, though, the shift work, that can be super brutal. That can be really, really hard to adjust to.
And what do you mean by what? Give me an idea what a shift work means.
Yeah, so when we were dating, the whole time we were dating and engaged, he was on night shift. And so he was working from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. And then I was working normal person hours, like 8 to 5 kind of thing. And so we wouldn't really see each other for about 4 days at a time. We would talk on the phone while I was driving to work and he was driving home. And then when I was driving home and he was driving to work. Thankfully, about a week before we got married, he actually got assigned to kind of the specialty position within the jail system and justice system, where he was actually on a day shift schedule. So for the first year that we were married, he was actually on day shift, which was great. And then after that, really pretty much the rest of his career, he was on swing shift, which is 3 p.m. to 1 a.m.
Mm, man, that's rough. So
Mm-hmm.
for that year, was he working at the court or something?
He was doing transport in the jails,
Oh,
so
okay.
taking inmates to appointments or
Mhm.
between different places.
Mm. So did he hate that? Like, was he the type of guy who, like, he really liked being out on the streets? I've
Oh
known
yeah,
some cops and they're like, "I don't want a desk job. I wanna be, like, out there." Is that kinda the way he was?
yeah. So in his department, they were required to do 2 years in the jail, and nobody likes that. That's the worst.
Uh-huh.
So for one of his years, he was doing that transport, and it was good in that he had a more normal schedule and he wasn't on nights anymore. But so boring. Nobody wants to do that.
Right, right, man. So is it 12 hours, 4 days? Is that, how they work, or are they doing 5 days and that counts as OT?
So in the jail, they do 12-hour shifts and they would do 3 days one week and 4 days the next week. So they'd kind of alternate. So that was nice on the weeks when he had 4 days off. But then on patrol, they do 4 10s.
Okay. All right. So, talk to me about what it's like being a sheriff deputy's wife. I mean, the concerns. I mean, obviously, you're probably worried every time he's out there, right?
I think I'm probably different than most of them in that I'm like, like you'll be fine. Like obviously I want you to be safe. I'm not like heartless, but I'm like, I trust your judgment. I trust your training that you have. Like I trust you to have good judgment and like make a good call and like keep yourself safe. Like I'm not out here freaking out if I don't hear from you for 10 minutes. Like you're busy, you're fine. You're just doing what you need to do. It'll be okay.
Sure. Does he ever come home with like injuries and stuff, and you're like, "Oh crap, how did that happen?"
Not too many, maybe a couple like cuts or bruises or things like that, but he was pretty lucky in that he did not have any like major injuries or um, really like severe incidents where I know some people aren't that lucky. Just some fights and things like that. So nothing too serious.
Yeah. Now, I know we spoke. The three of us, you, me, and him, we were kind of talking earlier, and he was sharing some of his experience about what sounded to be a little bit like some PTSD symptoms and stress from the job that kind of manifested over the course of time, and how he felt like he was changing. And
Mhm.
what was your experience with that? Understanding, how long ago did he leave? It was just recently, right?
About a month ago was
Oh,
his
wow.
last.
So like really recently.
Mhm.
Yeah. Was this a long time coming? Had you guys been having conversations about this for a while, or was he just all of a sudden, I don't want to do this anymore?
We had been talking about it for a long time. It was kind of like, I got to get out of this. Like, this is not good and sustainable long term. Like, it's really not. It's really not healthy. It's not a healthy environment to be in. Whether that's like the people on the streets or the people within like your coworkers, just really
Mhm.
not a good environment all around.
Mhm.
So it had been a long conversation of like, where do we go from here? What am I going to do next? And that kind of thing. So, um, really, really hard decision to make, really emotional decision. Um, because that's a big part of his identity and also a big part of his family. His dad and his brother are also or were also in law enforcement.
Wow. So, from the perspective of a wife watching her husband go through this, what are some of the changes over time that you started seeing?
Um he I think there was just an accumulation of a lot of bad things that have happened. Um and
Wait, let's start
every
before you go on. You say bad things that have happened. Do you mean like bad experiences at work, or bad things that have happened in life? What do you mean by that?
Oh, at work. Yeah, yeah. So like
Yeah.
calls he's gone to, like really traumatic, really scary, horrible, horrific things that people can't even begin to imagine. And I only know like barely surface level things that he's told me. And there's much more. Like just really traumatic bad things that happen in the world that 99.9% of people are oblivious to. And so that just really accumulates and like weighs on people after a while. So um, I think just some personality changes in terms of being a little bit more checked out. They call it the magic chair. There's this book, this like emotional survival for law enforcement or something like that. I can't remember the name of the book, but this guy calls it the magic chair. So they get home and they've been running way up here on all this adrenaline. They're literally fighting for their life, trying to survive. And then they get home and that's not sustainable. You can't function at that level constantly. And it's just a crash and it's just checking out and it's just like cannot engage or function or anything. And this is not to speak poorly of my husband at all. This is a problem across law enforcement or their similar careers, where like you just can't sustain that level of functioning.
Mm.
So that's part of it. And then yeah, I would say that's kind of the main thing. And then of course other little nuances and things off of there. But in terms of changes, it's really hard just to see how like worn down he was from how hard he had worked for so long. Um, Not necessarily because he wanted to and wanted to be gone and working that much, but because like of necessity
Mhm.
for a family, really.
Yeah, because he was saying there were some things that came up where, you know, uh, paying off school debts and other
Mhm.
things that he had to work a lot, like 16 hours a day for
Mhm.
days a week for a
Yeah.
while. And
Yeah.
that's and being out there, I don't think anyone would suggest that you talking about the reality of this is talking bad about your husband. I can't imagine being out there dealing with like just the hardest people to deal with in the world, like the
Mhm.
worst of the worst all day. You're getting
Yep.
called for all of these different things. I mean, imagine that you're going to work and every day could be the day that somebody stabs you, shoots
Mhm.
you.
Mhm.
Like, you're running into these people literally all the time. Sheriffs are different than CHP. They're
Mhm.
not just pulling people over for traffic
Mhm.
stops.
Right. Yep.
And and then you have to come home and then if you're coming home on a swing shift, you go to bed at 1 AM and you gotta get up and be super dad after
Yep.
all of that terrible thing you've seen. That
Yep.
that That's got to be tough.
Yeah, absolutely. Like it's really not healthy. It's not good.
Mhm.
Like this.
And how would that manifest how would that manifest with you and your kids? Like, was he short? Would it cause him, like, if he got right off a shift and you're like, "Hey, I need you to help me with this sick kid," it was like, you know, a little bit of a blow up, or how would that manifest?
Yeah, usually he like wouldn't really blow up that much, but would more so just be like, I can't deal with this. Like I just can't even function right now. I'm like, I have been with this screaming kid all day. Like you take her. Um, and there's only so much patience that a person can have. And when that's already been spent at work dealing with these horrible, terrible people, or your coworkers that are kind of crappy sometimes, then there's not much of that left for your family.
Yeah.
And so that was a big part of it. And that's not necessarily something that he always had control over, which, I mean, everyone's responsible for themselves and their own actions. But like given the situation, um, definitely not a whole lot of patience or a whole lot of space for toddler emotions or little kids feelings or things like that. They just come along with having babies and little kids.
And that, that's gotta be hard for you too, because I got to imagine, eh, unless it's gotta be hard for him and you, because he could tell you what it's like, but you really couldn't even imagine unless you were there, you know?
Yep.
Like, I've talked about this before. Do you remember the Ray Rice incident? The football
Mm,
player who hit his girlfriend in a Las Vegas.
not really, no.
Okay. So I'll just share it with you. I've shared about it on here before. So there was this report of this guy who's with the Baltimore Ravens, Ray Rice, and there was a report that he had knocked out his girlfriend in an elevator. Like, he punched her and knocked her out.
Hmm.
And so the NFL later, they suspended him for like 4 games. And they're like, "What do you mean you only suspended him for 4 games? Blah, 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 blah." And they're like, "Well, he's going to go through all these classes, yada, yada, yada." And then the video from the elevator got leaked, and you saw him punch her in the face. And then the NFL suspended him for life.
Mm.
And they're like, "Oh, well, wait a minute. What happened? What's the difference?" And they said, it's one thing to hear about it. It's another thing to see it.
Hmm.
And so I got to imagine for him, it's hard for him to even articulate what he's dealing with,
Yeah.
and hard for you to even imagine. And so he's coming home and he's emotionally spent, and he doesn't
Hmm.
know what you've been through all day with
Hmm.
2 screaming toddlers. You know what I mean? And you don't understand what he's been through, and that
Yep.
probably causes a little bit of strife.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm like, I need you to pay attention to me. Hello. And he's
Right.
like, I can't. Like, I just need a minute.
Right. Right. You keep bringing up also, like, difficult coworkers, or coworkers who aren't doing the things, like, can you give me an idea of what you're talking about there?
Um, I don't want to say too much that I'm not allowed to say, so I think I'll defer that question
Got it.
to him when you have him on and you talk to him.
Yeah, okay, that's fair. So all of this is going on over the course of time. You see these personality changes. He's been done for a month. What is he doing now?
He is doing sales.
Oh, okay. All right. What changes have you seen I mean, it's only been a month, right? But have you seen a drastic difference?
Oh yeah. Oh yes. Uh, Definitely much more space, like mental space, because
Mm,
he's not seeing these traumatic things all day, every day anymore. He's just bopping around, talking to people, normal conversations. And of course, there's still hard days and
mhm,
pros and cons to everything, but much more patience, much more space for the kids, for myself, and then the flexibility as well. One thing that was really really hard when he was in law enforcement was the hours. We
mm,
talked about the shift work, those schedules that's just kind of crappy all around. Like don't see each other really for weeks at a time, especially once I started working full time. I would be gone at 7 a.m. He's still asleep. I come home at 6. He's gone at work. Like we wouldn't see each other for the full week until we would have days off.
mm.
And even then, it's only like he'd have days off in the middle of the week. So we only see each other for a little bit in the evening. That kind of thing was really hard. So now he has much more flexibility in his schedule. There's no more mandatory OT or dive call out. Somebody stupid is getting in the river and they drowned, and now you have to go leave your family event to go pull them out of the river because they made a stupid choice.
Right.
So that just is really exhausting. So since he's been out, just the flexibility and being able to be present and be home has been huge.
Man, I got to imagine. I mean, it's so crazy to think that in just a month's time, you see that drastic of a difference. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it really goes to show, because you hear all this stuff in the media, and police have obviously in I'd say the last decade gotten a real bad rap, because of all the stuff you see in the media. And I don't think people understand what police officers go through on a day-to-day basis. And you have one cop who made one bad mistake, you know, and then next thing you know, all cops are bad. Defund the police,
Mm-hmm.
and that's rough, man.
It's a mess. It is horrendous. It's so bad. Like public's view of them, especially in California, different laws and things like that, and weird rules that they have and weird things they have to do that's just unnecessary and pointless and taking up their time. It's really just stupid. It's all a mess.
Yeah, man. Now let's shift gears a little bit, because you mentioned you started working. So you now also in all your free time with two toddlers, got a graduate degree.
Mm-hmm.
And what is your graduate degree in?
So I have a master's degree in genetic counseling.
Genetic counseling. And what is genetic counseling?
Yes, great question. So the short answer is that I explain complicated things to people in a way that they can understand so they can make informed decisions about their health. There's a lot more nuances than that, but that's kind of the elevator pitch.
Okay. So genetic counseling, like, are you talking about people who maybe they have some sort of genetic condition and you help them manage it?
Kind of. So not so much the like medical care side of things, but more so understanding the information surrounding it. So there's different specialties of genetic counseling. I work in prenatal. So primarily what I'm doing is I'm talking with pregnant women who have done some sort of blood screening test that comes back high risk, or they've had an ultrasound and there's abnormal findings on the ultrasound, something's wrong with their baby or something's unexpected, or they have a family history of a particular genetic condition in somebody else in the family, and they want to know the chance that their baby has this condition. That's kind of the more common things. Or there's also people that just come for a general conversation about screening options. And so I basically kind of a rough outline of one of my genetic counseling sessions, usually in about an hour. I take their medical history, their pregnancy history. I take a family history. So in prenatal, both the mom side, so my actual patient, and then the father of the baby, their side of the family, looking for red flags of things that could be related to a genetic condition or something that could be passed on through the generations to the baby. If there's anything that comes up in the family that's suspicious, then we have whatever conversation tailored to that. But then really the remainder of the conversation is focusing on whatever the reason is that they were referred to me. So say it is an abnormal ultrasound finding or a high risk blood test result that says their baby has a high chance of having Down syndrome, for example. Give them a whole background spiel on what do I mean by genetics? What is this? What are you talking about? What's chromosomes? What's DNA? What are genes? All of that. We talk about different types of inheritance. If there's a particular condition like Down syndrome, trisomy 18, trisomy 13, something that we're suspicious of, we'll talk specifically about what that condition is, what are the features of that, what's the prognosis. For other types of conditions, what are the treatment options, what are the different types of medical specialists that will be involved in your baby's care throughout their life. So talking specifically about that, we talk a lot about different types of genetic testing options. So in pregnancy, we have two different categories of genetic testing. We have screening tests. Those are non-invasive, typically a blood draw or ultrasound counts as a screening tool. And those are non-invasive things that can tell us the probability. So is there a high chance or is there a low chance that your baby has something specific? Versus diagnostic testing, that's done through invasive procedures, but that can either confirm that there is that condition there or that there's not, that the baby doesn't have that. So talking about all the different options for screening tests and diagnostic tests, risks, benefits, and limitations of all of those different tests. If a patient elects to do whatever test, screening test or diagnostic testing, we facilitate that. Once those results come back in, then I explain the results to the patient and what the implications of that are, or just really it depends on what the exact result is or what the exact scenario is, but what's the recurrence risk that this would happen again in future pregnancies? What are the implications for other family members and their risks for having a baby with this condition, things like that. If their baby is diagnosed with a specific condition, I give them resources about that and refer them to certain things, like if they need a fetal echocardiogram, which is a detailed ultrasound just of the baby's heart, then I can place those referrals and things like that to coordinate some more of their care.
It really is fascinating how much medical stuff we have to figure all this stuff out. It's like 50 years ago, like they're just like, I don't know, the baby came out, Down syndrome, there it is.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and now we have all these ways to test it. It's just so crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Yeah.
so are you the one, or maybe you could talk about if you've had this experience where you find out someone has some sort of genetic issue with their pregnancy and they're talking to you about options of keeping the baby or not.
Mm-hmm.
When that happens, do you find yourself in a kind of a strange position, or do you send them off to somebody else to do that?
So that's a conversation that I definitely have to have with people, particularly if it's a diagnosis that is not compatible with life. Something like their baby's skull didn't develop, or their baby doesn't have a brain, or there's a combination of multiple anomalies or multiple abnormal findings on the ultrasound that are not compatible with life. That's definitely a conversation that I have to have.
So when you
That's
say
not,
not compatible with life, do you mean like when they're born, they're not going to live very long? They're going to live a couple days at most, type thing?
or at all. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Or yeah. So just depending on what the condition is, we talk about the prognosis. So like what's the chance that your baby's even going to make it to a live birth? And then if they are live born, then whatever percentage live to a month, whatever percentage live to 6 months, whatever percentage live to a year, that kind of conversation. And so when talking about the decision to stop a pregnancy that's affected with one of these conditions, it's really a heart-wrenching conversation for these patients. It's very, very different than thinking about somebody having an abortion because they just don't want to be pregnant. It's completely different topics. These are very desired and wanted pregnancies. These are people who are mourning the loss of their baby, and it's not a decision that people take lightly.
Yeah. Wow. Talk about, do you feel, do these types of conversations, do you feel them as a burden or a blessing to be able to have them?
I think I'm glad that I'm the one that gets to have these conversations with people, particularly because of my training in delivering this type of news and sharing this type of information with people versus them just reading it online or hearing horror stories from other people. But it can be very, very draining. There's definitely cases where I finish an appointment with a patient and I'm like, that just drained me. That was exhausting emotionally. So it can definitely be hard, but I love my job. I love it so much.
Yeah, I could imagine that could also be rewarding. Do you follow these patients through birth at some points?
Sometimes, if they end up being followed by our fetal care and treatment center at UC Davis, then there's these weekly presentations where they'll update us on what's going on with this case, or where are they at, what's the delivery plan, that kind of stuff. So for the most part, most of my patients, it's good news. It's not like these horrible things every single day. And so usually once I'm kind of wrapped up, giving them their results, having that conversation, giving them the good news, kind of send them on their way usually.
Yeah. Wow. Now, this is a topic I really wanted to address with you because, I mean, you've got a 3 and 1 year old, right?
Yes, he'll be 1 on Christmas.
Oh,
And then
okay. Christmas Day, baby, huh?
mm-hmm.
Oh, you're gonna have to double up the gifts.
I know.
You can't be one of those parents that just like he gets gypped. You gotta,
Oh, no. None of that here.
So, so talk to me about the decision to be, I mean, you're a working mom, you work full time. And that is, for people who are listening who are not members of the LDS church, still kind of rare, right? So talk to me about your experience as being an LDS working mother. I mean, how does that, how did it feel to make that decision?
I think it's something that I always knew I wanted to do, and
So let
my
me back up.
perspective is
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I want to start right where you just started.
okay.
What was it about? I mean, I don't know. Like I said, I have a few years on you, but like that was not particularly encouraged, and I'm
Mhm.
guessing it's still not technically encouraged. So what is it about your experience that made you always want to be a working mother?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Just today in church, there was a comment about how women are supposed to stay home and raise the kids, and I was like, okay,
Mhm,
interesting.
mhm.
Um,
I hate blanket statements like that, by the way. We'll talk about that
Completely agree.
later.
I think part of it, my mom was always working full time when I was growing up. She was a single mom, so she had to be. And I had people make comments like other girls in the stake, like when I was a youth and young women's making comments like, oh, well, it says in church that your mom's supposed to stay home and women aren't supposed to work and blah, blah, blah. I was like, relax. You want me to be starving and homeless? Like, get off
Right,
my back. Like, leave me alone, kid. What do you know about anything?
right.
Uh, I think I've always been very ambitious in school, and I've always really liked school, which is not really typical. Most people don't like school. I love learning. I love school, probably because it's something that I excelled in and I did well in. And I think I derived some of my self worth from that when I was younger, which isn't necessarily healthy, but it is what it is.
Mhm.
And so I was always very ambitious in my schooling. And I think it was always important to me to be educated. And then I'm like, well, you should do something with that if you have an education. And not to say that people who stay home with their kids aren't doing anything. I think that that's even if you are a stay-at-home mom, I think it's still extremely important to be educated because you're the one teaching your kids primarily, or you should be. Um, and I just think that it's very, very important for people, particularly women, to be educated for a variety of reasons that we could spend a long time talking about. But um, I had kind of mentioned earlier I wanted to go to medical school. I wanted to be a doctor. I realized after a while I didn't really want to do that. I don't like touching people. I don't want to deal with all the nastiness that comes along with being a med student and a resident and all of that. So the best part of my job is I get to work with patients. I get to have these really cool cases, learn about really cool things, and I don't have to touch anyone along the way.
Well, this is interesting because, yeah, that you brought up, there are so many people out there. Well, the church says, yeah, but do people understand that there's a difference between like commandment and guidelines?
Hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Like, not everybody, there's a reason why we have personal revelation, and that is that it's not a one size fits all gospel.
Hmm.
So just because you make the decision, it's like if somebody out there, their husband, a husband and wife come together and hopefully pray about it and come to the revelation that one of them should stay home, that's good for them. But
Hmm.
if you're in a situation where no, that's not going to be good for anybody to have you staying home, um, then that is the revelation and the decision that your family has come to, and that doesn't mean that you're doing it wrong or that you're doing it bad. I am very much, this is something I used to be the hardcore, like, you know the hardcore guy that was just all about, oh, you don't do this, you don't do that, no, we don't do that, we don't drink caffeine, we don't do any of these things. And then I realized, I go, you know what, if you have a temple recommend, and I mean, I remember hearing a general conference talk where they said, if you have a temple recommend, it means you're being recommended to God. And I
Hmm.
was like, then that's enough, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
everything else is a personal decision, and you just respect it. If you want to, if part of your culture is tattoos and you want a tattoo, hey, I wouldn't do it, but you know what? That's good for you. You
Hmm.
want more than one earring because you got a migraine thing and you want to get something pierced or whatever to help fix that. That's good for you.
Hmm.
You shouldn't have to explain that to anybody. And yet I think that a lot of people, especially people like in your position, feel the need to explain themselves when they shouldn't have to.
Hmm.
Um, do you feel though, do you feel like, I mean, I think I've heard a lot of working mothers, especially with young kids, have mommy guilt when they go to when they go to work, right?
Yeah.
Do you feel, and probably hard for you to say because you only have one experience, but do you feel like that's amplified by your background in church?
Maybe. I think, like I had mentioned before, like I just don't really care what anyone else thinks or has to say about it. Um, because I think even like if the church is saying like, oh, like a mother should be like nurturing and whatever, like, okay, I can still be nurturing when I get home from work. Like it's not mutually exclusive. Like you can do both.
Right.
Um,
Well, and you also have an experience with a mother who was nurturing and also working, right? So different.
yeah. So definitely some guilt. Like I'm gone from my kids for 11 hours a day, 5 days a week. And that's not necessarily easy. As much as I love my job, I love my kids more. I would love to work part-time, 3 days a week. That's the dream.
Mm.
Because I would still be able to get to do what I love in my job and helping people, having these really cool conversations and helping people understand these really complex things that I love and I think I'm really good at. But I would also love to be with my kids more. So there's definitely some aspect of guilt and wishing that I could be home more. I think there's days where I'm like, oh, I'm just going to quit. I'm going to be a stay-at-home mom. I would love it. We'd have so much fun. And then some days I'm like, I could not. No way.
Right.
So I think
Yeah.
part-time is a really good deal if people can do that. But we're not quite there yet. So definitely some of that. I think in terms of the church aspect of things, I think some people just don't get it. They're like, oh, can you do this? Can you help with this? Can you do all of these things and responsibilities at church? I'm like, I don't have the time in the day to do that. I leave at 7 a.m. I get home at 6 p.m. I'm immediately feeding my kids dinner, putting them to bed, and then cleaning up and getting everything ready for the next day. So I would wish I could. I would wish I had more hours in the day, but I think um, some people just don't get that
Yeah.
if they don't work outside the home.
Yeah. That is very true. And it's interesting. I don't think people within who aren't members of the church, or who have never been members of the church, I don't think they realize how much of a commitment it truly is.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a religion where you're just going to church on Sunday. It's an everyday, all day, it becomes a part of your identity situation. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, you and I both served in the missionary correlation. And I
Mm-hmm.
got to tell you, like, that Wednesday at 8 o'clock or whatever it is rough. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
I mean, it's rough to get there. And, there, there are all these volunteer things you got to do, cleaning the church. If you're in a higher calling, because you were in the Relief Society presidency, right?
Yeah.
You are in the Relief Society presidency, right? Or
I got
were you?
released a couple months ago, so I was doing that for about a year. Now I teach Sunday school. Lexi's in my class, actually.
Fun. Okay, great. And so the interesting thing about that is that, like, I know you were a counselor, but I'm sure occasionally you might have had to go to like ward council,
Mm-hmm.
right? And if you're a president, you got to do that every week.
Yep.
And I mean, it's a grind. It's a grind to do that. And doing that as a working mother, it's almost like another part-time job sometimes, depending on the calling you have.
Oh
And it's
yeah.
right.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
so how do you balance all that?
You just do.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just survival mode. Like one day at a time, you pick what's the most important in this moment. What has to be done now or the soonest? What's the next deadline? Okay, get that done. Figure it out after that. So I don't know. It's hard. It's busy, but you just make it work.
All right, so I'm going to ask you, this is kind of off topic question, but I want to, not really. Okay. So you strike me as somebody, I don't know you that very well, but just in our conversation, you strike me as somebody who's ambitious and driven.
Mm-hmm.
And I've noticed that most ambitious, driven people have two things going on at the same time. They have a superiority complex where they think that they can do everything. And I'm speaking from experience. They think they can do everything better than everybody else. But they also tend to have a little bit of an inferiority complex where they never feel like no matter what they do, it's never good enough. Does that resonate with you, or do you think you have one or the other, or a little bit of both?
I would say historically, probably both.
Uh-huh.
I think that being a parent humbles you a lot. And so,
Right.
um, yeah, I think I don't really focus on comparing myself to other people, like, "Oh, I can do it better than them," or, "Oh, I'm not as good as them." Like, I
Mhm.
think I'm more competitive within myself and
Mhm.
like, "Oh, I need to be better than I was before," or like, "I'm not getting any better." Maybe that like that kind of aspect of that. So kind of same principles apply, but more so like within myself. Um, yeah, that's what I would say for
But
that.
I'm the same way, and it's like I said, I'm speaking from experience here because I just remember I remember specifically, a few years ago, I became a partner in my law firm, and that was, like, the big goal, and I've always had this thing where I was like, I don't know, I've a goal-oriented person, you probably are too, and you sit there and you go, "Okay, if I just get to this goal, then it'll be good," right? And then I remember getting to become a partner, and I remember leaving my boss's office when he told me I was voted in, and I go to my office and I sit there and I go, "Okay, what's next?" And I was
Mhm.
like, "Oh my gosh, it's never gonna be enough." You know what I mean? And so, like, uh, I think that's, do you get some of that when you're like, oh, you're competitive within yourself? Do you feel like that sometimes? You're like, "Okay, what's next? What do I do next? What's my next goal?"
I would say I was absolutely that way until I had my daughter, and I think now that energy is more poured into my parenting,
Ah,
if that makes sense.
totally.
And like, okay, what else can I research and learn about from these child development specialists to try to not mess up my kids too much? Everyone messes up their kids a little bit,
Yeah,
so
well,
you
my kids will need
have a
therapy
little
for sure.
leeway.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I
Yeah.
would say I pour that energy more into my kids now in terms of like, okay, what can I do? Not necessarily to make them the best, but what can I do to make myself be the best parent that I can be for my kids? And that looks different for everyone because every kid has different needs and every parent is different. So I'm not saying there's like one right or wrong way to parent, but what can I do the best for my kids?
Well, I'll tell you, as somebody who, I'm somebody who's worked a lot of hours as an attorney, and some people think like I sometimes when I interview attorneys, they'll say something. This is actually going to be a topic because somebody asked me a question on my Just Me podcast that's coming up soon that about this, and they asked me what is what's something that you hate to hear in an interview, and I
Mhm.
always hate to hear the words work life balance. And it's like, it's not because I don't want people to be able to go and work and do all this stuff or go and have fun time with their family, but it tells me that they're not very good at prioritizing
Mhm.
because you very much can. I'm telling you, how long you been working now?
About a year, almost a year.
Okay, so you've been at it for a little bit. You absolutely can work a lot of hours and still have good quality time with your kids.
Mhm.
Like, I work sometimes 60, 70 hours a week, and I still take my girls on daddy-daughter dates, my sons on father-son outings. I'm at almost every I can count on one hand the amount of basketball games and soccer games and all that garbage, like, that I've missed, right? You can do all of that. It's just a matter of prioritizing. Yeah, maybe you're not gonna be able to watch, the newest episode of 90 Day Fiancé right when it comes out, right? Which, by the way, I do highly recommend. It's great.
Okay.
Uh, but you can do all that stuff. It's just a matter of prioritizing. So if you have somebody who's trying to make you feel guilty as if like you can't be a good mom and work, then they just don't know. They've never tried it, right? They don't.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
So tell me now, you got two kids. I don't know how
Mhm.
many you plan on to have.
No more, no more.
No more. You're like, no mas, we're good. Two. Well, here's another thing I'll tell you, just as somebody whose kids are a little bit older, and that is that uh the best is yet to come. Like this
Mhm.
part where you got the toddlers, for me personally, like I've loved every iteration of my kids, but that was
Mhm.
the one I struggled with the most. Like they're just they need all the help and they're not very self-sufficient. You don't even really the jury's still out on what they're gonna be like. You know what I mean? But now when I've got my kids now, like you got Lexi in your class, she's 12, almost 13, 17, 15, 12, and 10, favorite time ever. Like,
Mhm.
they're all just so much fun, and they're all just out doing crazy things. You get a sense of who they're gonna be, and,
Right.
like, and all that, and you still could screw them up real bad, but, like, they're doing okay. That's the fun time, and so
Uh-huh.
what's next for you?
Oh, man. Great question. I think honestly, dropping to part-time, like that,
Yeah.
as much as I love my job, we already talked about that. I would really love to be with my kids more. Um, so I don't know, and see where that takes us. It's been a journey. I started grad school right after Avery was born. And
Mm.
so I I don't know. It's been a whole process. I think finding more time to spend all together as a family now that Jeremy is doing something different in terms of his career and we have more flexibility. I think that's something that would be really good for us because there were so many years that we basically didn't see each other. So Avery was born. I started my master's program with a newborn. And like we had kind of talked about before, my husband's working 80 to 90 hours a week um, to out of necessity to support us, to help us live, to really put me through school. I could not have done it without him. Beyond grateful for all the sacrifices that he made in terms of having to work that much and piling on more of that trauma that we talked about earlier. But that meant that we didn't see each other at all. He was always working, and then I was full 100% parent plus insane busy grad student. So that was really, really crazy. And so now that we've come out of that, out of the trenches a little bit,
Mhm.
hopefully up next is just more family time, more memories, and fun things together.
Yeah, a little bit of probably re relearning and reconnecting,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because those years are tough on families when you're grinding like that. And
Right.
you still even though it's kind of calmed down a little bit, you're still having two little kids like that is it's a grind, because like it's not a who wants the baby, it's which one do you want, and
Right.
that type of thing, and dealing with all that. So yeah, that's great. Well, let me ask you, um appreciate your time. I'm sure you've got all sorts of things that you could be doing with your time other than talking to me. But let me ask you a few questions I ask everybody. Uh,
Okay.
First one, what would you say is your biggest success in life?
Oh, that's a loaded question, I think,
I
because
know
I
it's
think the
designed to
type
be.
of this. Uh, I think number one, the first thing I would say, I'm not going to give you one answer. That's too hard to pick one. I'm going to cheat you.
You should have been a lawyer. Okay. Yeah.
So I think the first one is going back to how I used to be so shy and all of that is the personal growth that I've had through my experience competing in pageants and all my other life experience as well, but just my own personal growth in becoming the person that I am today, who
Mm,
can get up on stage in front of thousands of people and talk about whatever. Um, just coming from that point of being so painfully shy before, I'd say that's a huge success. Um, I think that my education, my schooling, my career, that's another huge success that I'm very, very proud of. And like I said before, I attribute a lot of that to my husband. I couldn't have done it without him. And then my last answer I'm going to say is my kids and instilling in them. I know they're still little, so they're still a work in progress, but instilling in them a love of Jesus, a love of the outdoors, and a love of reading.
mm.
So I think those are all really important things. And I can already see that in my 3-year-old. She's incredible. She's beyond smart and hysterical, and she's the best. But both of my kids love to read books. They both love to be outside. And I think those are really, really important things for character development.
Awesome, man. So tell me, what is your biggest failure in life and what did you learn from it?
Oh, I don't know. I think I made a lot of decisions that I maybe going back wouldn't necessarily make the same decision again, but I don't know that I would classify anything as a failure. I think in any circumstance you can learn from it,
Mhm.
whether something goes how you expect it to go or not. Um, I think just a general life lesson overall, not necessarily from one specific moment or example, is just being able to pick yourself up and keep going, dust yourself off, keep moving, keep grinding. Don't get like weighed down and feeling sorry for yourself and feeling bad for yourself, but just get up, keep working, keep going.
You know, this just popped in my head. I know we really didn't talk about it too much, but you know, your mom, single mom, right? And that
Mhm.
probably came on rather suddenly, and you know, had to move in with parents doing those things. Difficult time, I'm sure. How much did your mother set an example for you on how to pick yourself up and dust yourself off like that?
Hmm. Interesting. We have an interesting relationship. That's another thing to work through in therapy.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
she definitely had to do that though. She was single mom, 3 kids, trying to go back to school, working full time, all of that stuff. Um, and so there's definitely times that she had to do that, but I think for the most part, that's something I learned from a lot of different people in my life, not
Yeah.
just from her or not just from one person, but just as a lot of different examples in my life that have taught me that.
Perhaps a better question, what I was really trying to get to is who would you say is the most influential person in your life?
Mm. Oh, my initial gut reaction was Debbie.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay. Let's
I
hear about
think.
that.
Oh, I don't know. I think my grandparents too. We talked about my grandparents before because they like essentially raised us when my mom was at work.
Mhm,
She of course did her best that she could. I
mhm,
think the majority of people are doing the best they can with the resources and information and skills that they have available to
mhm,
them
mhm.
in that time and in that moment. But I would say my grandparents definitely. Debbie, I think she's just a really good example of being a good person.
She is. She I would say, like, in high school, and I'd say and you probably heard this on the podcast I was telling her, is that, like, in high school, she was so much better than us. You know what I mean? Like, as far like, I often wondered why she was hanging out with us. Like, you know, she was probably easily like I we used to always joke that we were number one friends, right? That was our thing.
Uh-huh.
We were the number one friends. And she really was my number one friend. I would call her, you know, and just vent about things. She was always around, always a good person to rely on, and always had just like the most positive spiritual stuff to say.
Mhm.
It did not shock me at all that she wanted to go on a mission. You know, and I was trying to talk her out of it, and nobody could, you know. Interesting. So, such a good person. She
She's the
really
best.
she is. So, well, okay, so last question I ask everybody, and that is someday, way down the road, you're gonna pass away, and when you do, there'll be a funeral. And when there's a funeral, someone's gonna give your eulogy. What would be
Mm.
the one thing you hope somebody says about you in your eulogy?
Oh, this is not something I've thought of because I hope this isn't coming anytime soon. Hopefully, I
Right,
have quite a few years left.
right.
I think I would say, or I would hope that people would remember me as being like supportive of them and supportive of their dreams and their goals, their ambitions, always cheering them on to reach those goals, whether that's my husband or my kids or my friends or even girls that I competed with in pageants 10 years ago. I hope that people who know me or who will know me or who have known me in the past will remember me as being just supportive, always cheering them on, celebrating their successes and their wins with them.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. Well, it has been very interesting getting to know you and hearing about these things. I've learned a lot about pageants,
Yep.
and I've learned a lot about you know, genetic counseling. I've learned a lot about that.
Mhm.
And also it's interesting to hear people's experiences with church that are so different. And I hope that somebody who's listening to this can hear this and realize that you know, I think everybody at one point or another, I know certainly I feel like they don't fit in the cookie cutter Mormon box. And
Mhm.
the thing is that box is really a fallacy. It's not
Yep.
really there.
Doesn't
And
exist.
it doesn't exist. Everybody you're looking at is dealing with something. They're just not telling you about it. And so hopefully this shed a little bit of light on that as well. And Paige, it's been awesome. I would say I can definitely see Debbie's influence. You're like a Debbie with an edge, you know. So
Okay, that's a compliment.
yeah, it was meant to be. So, all right. Well, if you've gotten this far, we got a lot more exciting stuff coming up. Subscribe, and Paige, we'll definitely have Jeremy on. We'll have him on soon as well, so we can hear about what it's like to be a police officer. So that'll be fun too.
Yeah, that'll be good. Thanks for having me.
All right.